At our 20th anniversary vow renewal, my husband grabbed the microphone and announced, 20 years ago, I married the wrong woman. Today I'm saying vows to the right one. Then he turned to my bridesmaid, Sarah, and got down on one knee. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret, and at 62 years old, I thought I had lived through all of life's surprises. Standing there in my ivory renewal dress, the one I'd spent 3 months selecting because Robert said he wanted everything to be perfect, I watched my entire world shatter in slow motion. But to understand how I ended up at that moment, watching my husband of 20 years propose to my best friend in front of everyone we knew, you need to know who I really was. I wasn't just Robert's wife. I was the woman who had given up everything to build our family from scratch. When we met in 1999, I was a successful cardiac nurse at Presbyterian Hospital, making good money and loving my career. Robert was a struggling law student, brilliant but broke, living on ramen noodles and ambition. I paid for his bar exam fees, supported us through his unpaid internships, and never once complained when he studied until 3 a.m. while I worked double shifts to keep us afloat. When our first child, Marcus, was born, Robert's career was just taking off. He begged me to stay home, promising that my sacrifice would be temporary, just until he made partner. 1 year turned into 3. 3 turned into 10. And suddenly, I was a full-time mother to 3 children, each pregnancy taking me further from the hospital floors where I'd once saved lives. I became an expert at different things instead. I knew exactly how Jennifer liked her sandwiches cut, how to calm David's night terrors, and how to help Marcus with his dyslexia when the school wanted to hold him back. Friends in our suburban Connecticut neighborhood called me the heart of Willowbrook Lane. When Sandra Miller's husband died suddenly, I organized meal trains for 6 months. When the Johnsons lost their home to foreclosure, I quietly paid for their children's school supplies and lunches, never telling anyone, not even Robert. Our church recognized me 3 years running for volunteer service. I ran the annual Christmas toy drive, taught Sunday school, and never missed a single one of my children's concerts, games, or parent-teacher conferences. Sarah had been part of this life since the beginning. We'd met at Yale New Haven Hospital where she worked in administration while I was in cardiac care. She was there when Robert proposed, helped me pick my wedding dress, and stood beside me as maid of honor when I was too nervous to walk down the aisle. She never married herself, always joking that she had impossibly high standards because she'd seen what Robert and I had together. Every Thursday for 20 years, she came over for wine and what we called our therapy sessions, where we'd laugh about life, cry about our struggles, and plan our futures. Sarah was Aunt Sarah to my children, the one who remembered their half-birthdays and snuck them candy when I wasn't looking. When my mother was dying of pancreatic cancer, Sarah took leave from her real estate job to help me manage the hospice care. She held my hand when Mom took her last breath, and she spoke at the funeral when I was too broken to form words. How many nights had she stayed over when Robert was traveling for work, keeping me company in that big house, telling me I was lucky to have such a devoted husband. The vow renewal had been Robert's idea, announced 6 months earlier over our anniversary dinner at La Bernardin. He'd held my hands across the table, his brown eyes misty with emotion, saying he wanted to show the world that true love only grows stronger with time. He wanted our children to witness their parents recommitting to each other, to give them hope that real love exists in a world of disposable relationships. Sarah had squealed when I told her, immediately volunteering to be my bridesmaid again, saying it would be like reliving the happiest day of our lives, but even better, because now we were all successful and established. I believed them both. After 2 decades of faithful devotion, of creating a home that was a sanctuary for everyone who entered it, of being the woman who everyone could count on, I believed I was about to be celebrated for the life I'd built. Instead, I was about to discover that kindness can be mistaken for weakness, that trust can be weaponized, and that the people closest to you can harbor the darkest intentions. 6 months before that devastating Valentine's Day, life seemed perfect in the way that only a life built over decades can feel. Our home on Willowbrook Lane had become exactly what I'd always dreamed of creating. The kitchen, renovated 5 years earlier with the bonus from Robert's biggest case win, was where I spent my mornings. The coffee maker would gurgle to life at 6 a.m. sharp, and Robert would come down at 6:15, his silver hair still messy from sleep, wearing the same ratty Yale law sweatshirt he'd owned since graduation. We had our routine down to an art form. I'd hand him his coffee, 2 sugars, splash of cream, in the blue mug Jennifer had made in her high school pottery class. He'd kiss my forehead, a habit 20 years strong, and we'd sit on the back porch watching the cardinals at the bird feeder I'd installed when we first moved in. We didn't always talk during these moments. Sometimes the comfortable silence of a couple who'd said everything important long ago was all we needed. Robert would scan the Wall Street Journal on his tablet while I planned the day's activities, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand when he read something interesting. Our children were all launched successfully into the world, which filled me with a pride that nothing else could match. Marcus, our eldest at 25, was completing his residency at Johns Hopkins, following my medical footsteps in his own way. Jennifer, 23, taught second grade in Boston, sending me videos of her students that made my teacher's heart swell. David, our baby at 21, had just graduated from Northwestern with a degree in engineering, already fielding job offers from companies I'd never heard of, but that apparently paid astronomical starting salaries. Sunday dinners had become our sacred tradition once the kids left home. Every week, without fail, they'd drive back to Connecticut, and I'd cook the pot roast that had become legendary in our family. Robert would open a bottle of wine from the collection he'd started building when Marcus was born, each bottle supposedly waiting for the perfect moment. Sarah joined us for these dinners at least twice a month, bringing her famous apple pie and stories from her real estate adventures. The dining room would fill with laughter as the kids teased each other mercilessly, the same dynamics they'd had since childhood playing out in adult form. Marcus would critique David's girlfriend choices, Jennifer would defend him while secretly agreeing, and Robert would pretend to read the paper while smiling at their banter. Sarah fit seamlessly into these gatherings, often staying late to help me clean up, while Robert retreated to his study to prepare for Monday's cases. During the week, I'd transformed my empty nest syndrome into purpose. Tuesdays were for the literacy program at the library, where I taught English to new immigrants. Wednesdays meant volunteering at the food bank, sorting donations with a group of women who'd become dear friends. Thursdays remained sacred for Sarah's visits. She'd arrive around 4 p.m. with a bottle of Pinot Grigio and whatever gossip she'd collected from her real estate showings. Those Thursday sessions in my sunroom were therapy without the copay. Sarah would sprawl on the love seat, shoes kicked off, while I curled up in my reading chair. We'd dissect everything from our aging bodies to our fears about relevance in a world that seemed to spin faster each year. She'd complain about nightmare clients who wanted mansion features on cottage budgets. And I'd share my worries about whether Robert was working too hard, whether the stress would trigger another cardiac episode like the mild one he'd had 5 years prior. Robert's health scare had actually brought us closer, or so I thought. He'd reduced his caseload, started delegating more to junior partners, and began talking seriously about retirement. We spent weekends browsing coastal properties in Maine, dreaming of a cottage where we could spend our summers once he fully retired at 65. He'd bookmarked sailing lessons, something he'd always wanted to try, and I'd enrolled us in a cooking class for couples at the Culinary Institute, scheduled to start after the vow renewal. The renewal planning had energized our social circle in a way that surprised me. Friends from every era of our lives reached out, excited to celebrate a marriage that had survived when so many others had crumbled. Robert threw himself into the details with an enthusiasm I'd never seen before, selecting everything from the flowers to the music with careful attention. He wanted our original wedding song, At Last by Etta James, to play during the ceremony. He insisted on the same cake flavor, Italian cream, from the same bakery that had made our original, though they were now run by the founder's daughter. Looking back, I should have noticed that this perfect life was too perfect, like a stage set waiting for the curtain to drop. But when you're living inside the warmth of what you've built, you don't feel the cold creeping in under the doors. The first odd moment came on a humid September evening, the kind where Connecticut can't decide if it's still summer or ready for fall. Robert had kissed me goodbye after dinner, claiming he needed to hit the gym because his back was acting up again and his physical therapist had recommended regular exercise. It was 9:30 p.m., an unusual time for him, but not unheard of. He'd taken his gym bag, the expensive one I'd bought him for Christmas, and promised to be back before the 11 o'clock news. I settled into bed with my book club novel, but something nagged at me. Maybe it was the way he'd avoided eye contact when he kissed me, or how he'd changed cologne recently without mentioning it, switching from the woodsy scent I'd bought him for 20 years to something sharper, younger. At 10:15, I realized I'd left my reading glasses in the car and needed them for the small print. When I went to the garage, I noticed Robert's tennis racket was still there, though he'd specifically mentioned playing rackers after his workout with his buddy Tom. The gym was only 10 minutes away, and I told myself I was being ridiculous as I drove there. I'd grab my glasses from my car, maybe peek inside to wave at Robert and laugh at myself later for being paranoid. But when I pulled into the well-lit parking lot of Equinox Fitness, Robert's silver Lexus wasn't there. I circled the building twice, checked the overflow parking, even drove to the wrong location across town thinking maybe he'd gone there by mistake. Nothing. When he came home at 11:20, his hair damp with what I assumed was shower water, I mentioned casually that I'd stopped by the gym to grab my glasses from my car in the parking lot. His response was smooth, too smooth. He laughed, that easy lawyer's laugh he used in court, and explained that he'd parked around back because they were repaving the front section. He showed me his phone, pointing to the gym's app that tracked his check-in at 9:45 p.m. Everything had a perfect explanation. The tennis racket? Tom had canceled last minute. The cologne? A sample from Nordstrom he'd wanted to try. 3 days later, Sarah canceled our Thursday wine session for the first time in 6 months. Her text came at noon, apologizing profusely, claiming she had to show a house to a client who was only in town for the day. She promised to make it up to me the following week with an expensive bottle and fresh gossip. It shouldn't have bothered me, but Sarah was religious about our Thursdays. She'd shown houses during our time before, but always worked around it, sometimes arriving with contracts still in hand, finishing them while we talked. The following week, she canceled again. This time, it was a migraine, the third one she'd had that month, according to her texts. I offered to bring her soup to sit with her in the dark like I'd done before, but she insisted she just needed sleep. When I drove past her condo that evening on my way home from the grocery store, her car wasn't there and her lights were on. Maybe she'd gone to urgent care, I reasoned. Maybe her sister had picked her up. Robert started having late meetings with increasing frequency. His explanation was always reasonable. A big merger required overseas calls with Tokyo. A pro bono case for a wrongly convicted man needed extra attention. The younger partners needed mentoring. He'd come home with detailed stories about these meetings, complete with amusing anecdotes about difficult clients or confused junior associates. If I hadn't found a receipt from a restaurant 40 miles away in his jacket pocket while doing laundry, I would never have questioned them. When I asked about the receipt, he pulled up his calendar, showing me a client meeting at that exact restaurant on that exact date. The client preferred privacy, he explained, choosing locations away from the city where they wouldn't run into colleagues. He even showed me the email confirmation from his secretary about the reservation. Everything was always explainable, documentable, reasonable. But patterns began emerging that explanations couldn't quite cover. Robert and Sarah never seemed to get sick at the same time anymore, though for years they'd shared every cold that went through our social circle. They stopped interrupting each other at dinner parties, that comfortable way old friends talk over one another. When Sarah's phone rang during one of our eventually resumed Thursday sessions, she practically dove across the room to silence it, claiming it was a spam call without even looking at the screen. The most unsettling moment came when I was looking through photos on Robert's phone to find one of David's graduation for our holiday card. His recently deleted folder was full of screenshots of houses in Florida, expensive properties on the water, nothing like the modest Maine cottage we'd been discussing. When I asked, he said he was researching for a client. Another perfect explanation that left me feeling crazy for doubting him. I became my own worst enemy during those weeks, constructing elaborate explanations for every inconsistency that protected the life I thought I had. Lying in bed at night, I'd stare at Robert's sleeping form and lecture myself about the dangers of an overactive imagination. This was Robert, I'd remind myself, who still brought me roses every Friday, who knew exactly how I liked my eggs on Sunday mornings, who had held my hair back through 3 pregnancies worth of morning sickness. This man had cried at our children's graduations, had spent 17 hours by my side during Jennifer's complicated birth, had emptied his entire savings to pay for my father's cancer treatment without being asked. The mind is remarkable in its ability to rationalize when the truth is too painful to consider. I told myself I was going through a typical adjustment period that many women face when their children leave home. My therapist had even warned me about this years ago, saying that empty nest syndrome could manifest as anxiety, paranoia, and a tendency to create problems where none existed. I pulled out the pamphlets she'd given me, rereading sections about redirecting nervous energy into positive activities. Sarah's behavior had perfectly reasonable explanations too, I decided. She was 43 and single, probably going through her own midlife crisis. The real estate market was brutal lately with interest rates rising, and she was under pressure to maintain her sales numbers. When she mentioned during one of our catch-up calls that she'd been seeing someone new but wasn't ready to talk about it, I felt relief wash over me. Of course she'd been acting strange. She was navigating new romance at an age when most of us had been married for decades. I even teased her about keeping secrets, and her nervous laugh felt like confirmation of an innocent crush rather than something darker. When Robert suggested the vow renewal in October, presenting it over our anniversary dinner with tears in his eyes, I felt ashamed of every suspicious thought I'd harbored. He spoke about wanting to celebrate our survival through the hard years, wanting our children to witness that true love wasn't just a fairy tale but something that required work, commitment, and choosing each other every single day. He'd already talked to Father Michael at our church, had looked at venues, had even created a Pinterest board of ideas, something so unlike him that it made me laugh through my own tears. The enthusiasm with which he approached the planning should have been my biggest red flag, but I interpreted it as a romantic renaissance. Maybe his recent distance had been him processing his own emotions about getting older, about our children leaving, about mortality after losing 2 college friends to heart attacks in the past year. I constructed an entire narrative where Robert was rediscovering our love, channeling his lawyer's attention to detail into creating the perfect second wedding. Sarah's immediate offer to be my bridesmaid again felt like the universe confirming that everything was fine. She threw herself into helping me plan with an energy that reminded me of our younger days. We spent entire afternoons browsing dress shops, her encouraging me to try on styles that showed off what she called my yoga arms, the result of 3 years of morning vinyasa classes. She created spreadsheets for vendors, negotiated with florists using her real estate skills, and even offered to pay for the photographer as her anniversary gift to us. My children's excitement about the renewal further silenced any lingering doubts. Marcus called it relationship goals, saying his friends couldn't believe his parents were still so in love. Jennifer started a family group chat specifically for planning surprises for the ceremony, coordinating with her brothers to create a video montage of our 20 years together. David, usually our most cynical child, wrote a speech about how our marriage had shown him what to look for in a partner, how he hoped to find someone who looked at him the way I looked at Robert. I threw myself into preparations with desperate determination to prove my instincts wrong. I booked couples' massage appointments, thinking the suspicion was just stress manifesting. I started cooking Robert's favorite meals more often, believing that if I just loved him harder, whatever distance I was sensing would disappear. I even bought new lingerie, telling myself that maybe we'd just fallen into a rut that needed shaking up. Friends commented on how happy I seemed, how the renewal planning had given me a new glow. I accepted their compliments while pushing down the voice that whispered something was wrong. When Robert worked late, I'd text him supportive messages about not overdoing it. When Sarah canceled plans, I'd send her funny memes to cheer her up from what I assumed was work stress. I became the architect of my own deception, building walls of denial so strong that even obvious signs couldn't penetrate them. Looking back, I realize I was terrified of what acknowledging the truth would mean. 20 years of marriage, 3 children, an entire identity built around being Robert's wife and Sarah's best friend. Sometimes denial isn't ignorance. It's self-preservation when you're not yet strong enough to face what's coming. The discovery happened on a Thursday afternoon in early December, just 2 months before the vow renewal. I was assembling photos for the video montage Jennifer was creating, searching through old boxes in Robert's study for pictures from our early years. His desk drawer was slightly open, and when I tried to close it, it stuck. Inside, wrapped in an old phone charger cable, was his previous iPhone, the one he'd supposedly traded in 6 months ago when he upgraded. Curiosity made me plug it in, just to see if any old photos were stored on it that hadn't been backed up. The screen came to life, and to my surprise, it was still connected to our home Wi-Fi, still receiving his emails and messages through the cloud sync he'd apparently forgotten to disable. Most of the emails were routine, forwarded, from his work account, but I noticed a drafts folder with 47 unsent messages. My hands trembled as I opened the first draft, dated 3 weeks ago. It was addressed to Sarah, though her name wasn't in the recipient field yet. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about the way you looked in that red dress, the way you whispered my name when... I couldn't read further. My stomach churned as I scrolled to another draft. Margaret suspects nothing. She's so focused on the renewal that she doesn't see what's right in front of her. Valentine's Day will change everything. The room spun as I sat down heavily in Robert's leather chair, the one I'd bought him for his 50th birthday. Another draft, this one longer, detailed. 20 years of pretending is almost over. Once we're in Florida, we can finally stop hiding. The house in Boca Raton is perfect, just like you showed me. Marcus, Jennifer, and David will understand eventually. They're adults now. They'll want their father to be happy. Florida. The screenshots of houses I'd found months ago weren't for a client. My fingers moved on autopilot, searching through the phone's text messages. Most had been deleted, but the recently deleted folder hadn't been emptied. Fragments of conversations floated like debris from a shipwreck. Sarah? She asked about Thursday again, running out of excuses. Robert? After Valentine's, we stick to the plan. Sarah? The apartment in Boca is ours if we want it. Owner accepts cash. Robert? Transfer happens Monday. She won't notice, too busy with party planning. There were photos, too, in a hidden album he'd probably forgotten existed on this phone. Sarah at a restaurant I didn't recognize, wearing a dress I'd helped her pick out for a date with someone special. Robert's hand holding hers across the table. A selfie of them at what looked like a beach. But not any beach, near Connecticut. The timestamp showed it was taken during his supposed legal conference in Atlanta last month. I found myself methodically taking photos of everything with my own phone, my hands steady even as my world collapsed. Years of being a nurse kicked in, that ability to function through crisis, to document everything precisely when it mattered most. I found hotel reservations in his email, charges from jewelry stores that weren't for gifts I'd received, dinner receipts from restaurants where he'd supposedly been entertaining clients. The most damaging evidence was in his legal documents app. Divorce papers, already drawn up but not yet filed, citing irreconcilable differences. asset division worksheets that allocated most of our joint accounts to him based on some technicality about contribution percentages, a property transfer document for our house requiring my signature with a post-it note notation, "Get her to sign during renewal excitement. Frame as refinancing for better rate." There were emails to a lawyer in New York, someone outside his usual network, discussing Connecticut divorce law, asking about the fastest way to dissolve a marriage after papers were signed, inquiring about what would happen if one party was emotionally unstable during proceedings. The lawyer's response mentioned that if I could be shown as mentally unfit, Robert could potentially gain control of assets meant to be divided equally. Sarah's involvement was documented too. Real estate contracts in Florida with both their names as buyers dated 6 months ago, right when Robert had suggested the vow renewal, email exchanges about investment properties they'd viewed together, a business plan for a joint venture, him practicing law in Florida, her selling real estate, funded by what they called initial capital, but what I recognized as our life savings. The final blow was a draft email to our children to be sent after Valentine's Day. "Your mother and I have grown apart. This renewal ceremony made us both realize we've been living a lie. I found true love with Sarah, and we believe honesty is better than continuing this charade. Your mother will be taken care of financially, and we hope you can be happy for us in time." I sat in that study for 3 hours, the winter sun setting outside, printing everything, forwarding documents to my private email, building an evidence file with the methodical precision of someone preparing for war. Because that's what this was now, war. I confronted neither of them. Instead, I became an actress worthy of an Oscar playing the role of the excited wife, planning her dream vow renewal while secretly documenting their every move. I installed a tracking app on Robert's old phone that was still syncing with his current one, watching him drive to Sarah's condo when he claimed to be at client dinners. I smiled through Sunday dinners as Sarah complimented my pot roast while sexting my husband under the table. I enthusiastically discussed flower arrangements with her while screenshots of their conversations burned in my hidden folder. The depth of their deception was staggering. Every Thursday when Sarah canceled our wine dates, she was with Robert at a rental apartment they'd leased downtown under her company's name. The migraines she'd been suffering, code for their rendezvous. When Robert had his cardiac episode 5 years ago, Sarah had been his emergency contact, not me. The hospital records I pulled showed she'd spent the night in his room while I was home with the children, believing he was in intensive care with restricted visits. I discovered Robert had been siphoning money from our accounts for 18 months, small enough amounts to go unnoticed but totaling nearly $200,000. He justified every withdrawal with perfect explanations. Marcus needed loan help, unexpected tax payments, investment opportunities that required liquid capital. Meanwhile, Sarah had been showing him properties, not just in Florida but in Costa Rica, Switzerland, places without easy extradition if financial fraud was discovered. The most painful revelation came from Sarah's social media, which I accessed through a fake account. Private posts dating back 2 years, visible only to her sister, detailed her growing feelings for Robert. "He understands me like no one else," she'd written. "Margaret doesn't deserve him. She's become so boring, so predictable. All she talks about is her volunteer work and her children. Robert needs passion, adventure, someone who matches his ambition. I can give him that." Reading their text exchanges was like watching 20 years of my life rewritten as a joke. They'd developed a whole language of deception. Working late meant he was with her. Client emergency meant they were at their apartment. Margaret's having one of her moods was code for when I'd gotten too close to the truth. They laughed about my trusting nature, calling me the saint with dripping sarcasm. Robert had told Sarah intimate details about our marriage, things I'd thought were sacred between us. My struggles with postpartum depression after David, the miscarriage we'd never told anyone about, my insecurities about aging. Sarah had used every vulnerability I'd shared with her as ammunition, advising Robert on how to manipulate me. When I'd worried about being less attractive at 60, she'd suggested Robert compliment me more to keep her docile and unsuspecting. The vow renewal wasn't just their exit strategy, it was their cruel victory lap. They wanted our friends, our children, everyone who mattered to witness the moment when Robert publicly chose Sarah over me, when 20 years of marriage was revealed as a mistake corrected. The scope of their plan went far beyond simple adultery and financial theft. As I dug deeper, aided by a forensic accountant James recommended, I uncovered a conspiracy that had been 3 years in the making. Robert hadn't just been stealing money. He'd been systematically destroying my financial identity while building Sarah a fortune using my name and credit. He'd opened credit cards in my name, maxing them out with cash advances that went straight into accounts I couldn't access. The paper trail was deliberately messy, made to look like compulsive shopping and gambling addiction. There were charges to online casinos, luxury retail sites, even payments to psychics and wellness retreats that I'd never attended. If anyone investigated, it would appear I'd been spiraling into middle-aged crisis, wasting our family fortune on desperate attempts to find meaning. Sarah had been the architect of my social destruction. Those canceled Thursday sessions weren't just for affairs. She was meeting with our mutual friends, expressing concern about my mental state. She'd told Jennifer she'd caught me talking to myself in the garden. She'd mentioned to Marcus that I'd been forgetting important dates, seeming confused during conversations. To David, she'd suggested I might be drinking alone during the day. Each child got a slightly different story, but the narrative was consistent. Their mother was falling apart. The property fraud was even more elaborate. Robert had forged my signature on a power of attorney document, claiming I'd signed it during his fake cardiac episode 5 years ago when I was too distraught to remember. Using this, he'd taken out a second mortgage on our house, liquidated my inherited IRA from my mother's estate, and even sold the vacation cabin my father had left me, the one in Vermont where we'd spent every childhood Christmas. The buyers were shell companies Sarah had created, purchasing the properties at fraction of their value. They'd planted evidence of an affair between me and James, Robert's former partner who'd been forced out of the firm. Doctored photos showing us entering hotels together, fake email exchanges expressing feelings that never existed, even a burner phone hidden in my car with suggestive messages. If I tried to expose them, they'd claim I was projecting my own infidelity onto Robert, that I was the unfaithful one trying to steal marital assets from my lover. The Valentine's Day renewal was to be filmed by a professional crew they'd hired, not for memories, but for evidence. They'd scripted the whole scene: Robert's dramatic revelation, my expected breakdown, Sarah's shocked acceptance of his proposal. The video would be edited to show me as unstable, violent if I reacted badly, or cold and unloving if I remained composed. Either reaction would support their narrative in divorce court. But the cruelest element was discovering they'd involved my children peripherally in their scheme. The video montage Jennifer was creating, the speeches the kids were writing, their excitement about the renewal, all of it would be used to show that even our children supported Robert's happiness with Sarah over their mentally declining mother. They'd manipulated my babies into becoming unwitting accomplices in my destruction. 3 nights before Valentine's Day, I sat in my car in the empty parking lot of the church where Robert and I had married 20 years ago. The building was dark except for the eternal flame flickering in the sanctuary window, and I sobbed until my ribs ached and my throat felt raw. The sound that came from me wasn't crying. It was the keening of something dying, the death rattle of every belief I'd held about love, friendship, and trust. 20 years of memories assaulted me in waves, each one now poisoned by the truth. I remembered standing at that very altar, 8 months pregnant with Marcus, when Robert surprised me with a vow renewal ceremony for our first anniversary, because I'd been too sick with morning sickness to enjoy our wedding day. Had he been sincere then, or was I already a burden he was planning to discard? I thought about Sarah holding my hand during my mother's funeral, whispering that I was the strongest woman she knew. Was she already sleeping with my husband then, offering comfort with hands that had touched him the night before? The physical pain was unbearable. My chest felt crushed, as if someone had reached inside and was squeezing my heart with both fists. I understood now why they called it heartbreak. I could actually feel the muscle struggling, skipping beats, flooding with cortisol and adrenaline until I wondered if I might die right there in that parking lot. Part of me wanted to. It would be so much easier than facing what came next. I thought about my children, how this would shatter their worldview. Marcus, who'd modeled his own relationship after ours, who called his girlfriend his Margaret. Jennifer, who'd written her college thesis on the importance of stable marriages in childhood development, citing us as her primary inspiration. David, my sensitive baby, who still called every Sunday to tell me he loved me, who'd tattooed my birthday on his wrist because I'd almost died delivering him. How could I tell them their father was a monster and their beloved Aunt Sarah was worse? The sacrifices I'd made felt like mockery now. Every career opportunity I'd turned down to support Robert's ambitions, every friend I'd lost touch with while building our perfect family life, every piece of myself I'd carved away to fit into the role of perfect wife and mother. I'd given up my nursing career at its peak, turned down a position as head of cardiac care, said no to a doctorate program, all because Robert needed me home. I'd been hollowed out slowly, so gradually I hadn't noticed until there was nothing left but the shell they were about to publicly crack open. I drove to the bridge over the Connecticut River, the one where Robert had proposed on a snowy December evening in 1999. Standing at the rail, looking down at the black water, I thought about how easy it would be to just step over, to let them win, to spare my children the ugly truth. My hands gripped the frozen metal until they went numb, matching the numbness spreading through my soul. This wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. They hadn't just stolen my future. They'd rewritten my past, making every moment of joy, every memory of love into a lie. Standing on that bridge, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Mom, just finished the video montage. You and Dad are going to cry. You're proof that true love exists. I love you so much." A photo was attached, a screenshot from our wedding video showing Robert and me laughing, young and genuinely happy before Sarah, before the lies, before everything turned rotten. Something shifted inside me, like a bone snapping back into place after being dislocated. My daughter believed in love because of me. Not because of Robert, but because of the home I had created, the values I had instilled, the countless nights I'd stayed up talking her through heartbreaks while showing her she was worthy of real love. I had built something real and good, even if it was built on a foundation of lies. My children were not his triumph. They were mine. I drove straight to James Morrison's house, Robert's former law partner who'd been forced out of the firm 5 years earlier. It was nearly midnight, but his porch light was on. When he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't ask questions. He simply said, "I wondered when you'd finally come." Over coffee in his kitchen, James revealed what I'd suspected. Robert had destroyed him too, using forged documents and false accusations to steal his share of the practice. James had been waiting, gathering evidence, hoping someone would believe him. "Margaret," he said, his eyes fierce with a rage that had been simmering for years. "Robert thinks he's invincible because he's never faced a real opponent. He's only fought people who trusted him. But you're not going to be his victim. You're going to be his reckoning." Within an hour, James had assembled a team, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud, a private investigator who'd worked FBI cases, and a divorce attorney known for destroying corrupt spouses in court. But more importantly, he had something Robert didn't know existed: recordings. James had been secretly recording his conversations with Robert for months before his departure, legal in Connecticut with one-party consent. The recordings included Robert bragging about his ability to manipulate me, discussing his affair with Sarah, and planning James's professional destruction. I felt my spine straighten, the nurse in me returning. The woman who had once saved lives in cardiac units, who could think clearly when everyone else panicked. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about showing my children that their mother wasn't weak, wasn't a victim, wasn't the mentally unstable woman Robert and Sarah were painting me to be. It was about every woman who'd ever been discarded after giving everything, every friend who'd been betrayed by someone they trusted with their secrets. I need 3 days, I told James. Valentine's Day is Saturday. I want them to think they've won. I want them to stand at that altar in front of everyone we know and show exactly who they are. James smiled, the kind of smile sharks might make before feeding. Then let's make sure their victory becomes their confession. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in strategic warfare. James's forensic accountant, Patricia Chen, worked through the night documenting every financial crime, creating a paper trail so damning that the FBI would later use it as a teaching case. She discovered Robert had committed tax fraud spanning 5 years, hiding assets in offshore accounts under Sarah's deceased mother's name. The IRS penalties alone would bankrupt him. The private investigator, Marcus Webb, was even more thorough. Using the tracking data from Robert's phone, he photographed Robert and Sarah entering their secret apartment 12 times in 2 weeks. He pulled security footage from hotels across 3 states, documented their trips together while I thought Robert was at conferences. Most importantly, he recovered deleted messages from Sarah's cloud backup, including one where she detailed her plan to have me institutionalized after the renewal, claiming I'd had a psychotic break from the shock. I hired my own videographer for the renewal, telling Robert I wanted multiple angles to capture our special day. What I really wanted was evidence of their crime being committed in real time. The videographer, recommended by James, was actually a documentary filmmaker who specialized in exposing fraud. She would capture every moment of their deception in 4K clarity. But the masterstroke was the legal preparation. James's divorce attorney, Michelle Hartman, filed sealed documents with the court Friday morning to be opened only after the ceremony. These included emergency restraining orders, asset freezes, and criminal fraud charges. She also prepared lawsuits against Sarah for alienation of affection and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Connecticut was one of the few states where we could destroy Sarah financially for her role in destroying our marriage. I had Robert's old phone cloned, creating a mirror that recorded everything on his current device. Through this, I captured his Friday night conversation with Sarah, where they laughed about my pathetic excitement for the renewal, discussing how they'd leave directly from the reception for the airport, flying to Costa Rica where they'd hidden $2 million of our assets. Sarah actually said, "By the time the stupid cow realizes what happened, we'll be untouchable." The most satisfying discovery came Friday afternoon. Sarah had been stealing from her real estate clients, using their escrow funds for her property purchases with Robert. She'd been so careful with most things, but love had made her sloppy. The paper trail was clear, irrefutable. She wasn't just facing civil lawsuits, she was facing prison time. I prepared USB drives with all the evidence, one for each of our children, our key friends, and most importantly, for Father Michael. I wrote a letter to each of my children, explaining everything, assuring them this wasn't their fault, that their father's choices didn't diminish my love for them or theirs for him. I wanted them to hear the truth from me, with proof, before Robert could spin his narrative. Saturday morning, I put on my ivory renewal dress, the one Sarah had helped me choose, and looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a woman about to teach 2 predators what happened when they mistook kindness for weakness. My something old was my mother's necklace, my something new was my titanium spine, my something borrowed was James's thirst for justice, and my something blue was the flash drive hidden in my bouquet. Valentine's Day arrived with crystalline perfection, the Connecticut sky a brilliant blue that seemed to mock the darkness I knew was coming. The Rosewood Country Club looked magical, with white roses and baby's breath creating an archway where Robert and I would renew our vows. 150 guests filled the garden venue, a mixture of family, friends from every stage of our lives, Robert's legal colleagues, and Sarah's real estate associates. Our children sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Marcus having flown in from Baltimore, Jennifer driving from Boston with her boyfriend, and David postponing a job interview to be there. I stood in the bridal suite letting Sarah fuss with my hair while fighting the urge to grab her by her perfectly styled blonde locks and demand answers. She wore the red bridesmaid dress she'd insisted on, claiming it would photograph beautifully against the white roses. Now I understood the real reason. She wanted to stand out, to be memorable when Robert turned to her. She kept checking her phone, texting rapidly, probably coordinating with Robert about their post-ceremony escape. "You look radiant, Margaret," Sarah said, her voice syrupy with false emotion. 20 years, and Robert still looks at you like you're the only woman in the world." The lie rolled off her tongue so easily that I wondered how many others she'd told over the years. How many times had she comforted me about problems she'd created, offered advice about a marriage she was actively destroying? My hands remained steady as I applied my lipstick, the same shade of pink I'd worn at our original wedding. In the mirror, I caught Sarah smirking at her phone, quickly hiding it when she noticed me watching. She had no idea that James was in the audience with federal marshals on standby, that Patricia Chen was sitting in the third row with FBI agents, that the videographer I'd hired was actually wearing a wire that was recording everything for the criminal prosecution that would follow. Robert waited at the altar in his charcoal gray tuxedo, the one I'd helped him select 2 months ago. He kept glancing at his watch, then at Sarah, little signals they thought were subtle. Father Michael, who'd married us 20 years ago, stood ready with his prayer book, unaware that I'd given him a sealed envelope that morning with instructions to open it only if something unusual happened during the ceremony. Inside was evidence of everything, along with a request for him to serve as a witness for the prosecution. The string quartet began playing Pachelbel's Canon, our original processional music, and I started the walk that would either destroy me or set me free. Each step felt like moving through molasses, time stretching as I noticed everything with hyper-clarity. Robert's business partner, Tom, who'd been covering for Robert's affairs while pretending to be my friend. My book club ladies, who'd listened to Sarah spread rumors about my mental state while smiling to my face. Our neighbors, the Wheelers, who'd seen Robert's car at Sarah's condo but never said a word. My children stood as I passed, Jennifer wiping tears she thought were from joy. Marcus recording on his phone for posterity. David giving me a thumbs up and mouthing, "You got this, Mom." They had no idea their world was about to shatter, that the video they'd spent weeks creating would become evidence in their parents' divorce proceedings, that their beloved Aunt Sarah would be in handcuffs before the sun set. I reached the altar where Robert waited, his smile practiced and false. He took my hands, and I felt the calluses from his gym sessions. The ones he'd claimed were from tennis, but I now knew were from the boxing classes he took with Sarah. His cologne, the new one, wafted over me, and I wondered if she'd chosen it, if every change I'd noticed had been her remaking him for their new life. "You look beautiful," he whispered, loud enough for the front rows to hear, playing the devoted husband one last time. The videographer moved closer, capturing his face in perfect detail as Father Michael began the ceremony with words about the sanctity of marriage, about truth and fidelity, about promises made before God and man. Robert's eye twitched slightly at the word fidelity, the only sign that his conscience might still exist somewhere beneath the lies. Father Michael reached the part about renewing our original vows, then announced that Robert had prepared special words for this occasion. This was it, the moment they'd planned, the grand finale of their deception. Robert took the microphone with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won, who thought his victim was too blind, too trusting, too weak to fight back. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. Robert cleared his throat, his lawyer's voice carrying across the garden as he began his prepared speech. 20 years ago, I made a choice that defined my life. Today, I stand here to make another one. His eyes swept the crowd, building to his moment of triumph. Sometimes we realize that the paths we've chosen, no matter how long we've walked them, weren't meant for us. Sometimes true love comes when we least expect it. I watched Sarah step slightly forward, her hand moving to her heart in practiced surprise. Robert continued, 20 years ago, I married the wrong woman. Today, I'm saying vows to the right one. He turned to Sarah, dropping to one knee, pulling out a Tiffany blue box that contained a ring bought with money stolen from our children's college funds. The crowd gasped. Some people started crying, thinking they were witnessing a romantic gesture. Others looked confused, unsure what was happening. Our children sat frozen, Marcus's phone still recording, Jennifer's mouth open in shock, David starting to stand as if to intervene. Before my husband continues, I said, my voice clear and steady as I pulled out my phone, everyone should hear something. I pressed play, and Robert's voice filled the garden through the venue's sound system that I'd had the AV technician connect to my phone that morning. The recording was crystal clear. The stupid cow actually thinks I love her. 20 years of pretending is almost over. Once we transfer the assets and leave tomorrow, she'll have nothing. Sarah, baby, you're brilliant for suggesting the public humiliation. She'll be too destroyed to even fight back. Sarah's voice followed. She's pathetic, really. All those Thursday nights, crying to me about your distance while I was the reason for it. Remember when she asked if you were having an affair? I almost laughed in her face. By the time she figures out what we've done with the money, we'll be in Costa Rica. The garden erupted in chaos. Sarah's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the white runner, her red dress pooling around her like blood. But she wasn't, just fainting from shock. She was trying to reach her purse where her phone held incriminating evidence. Robert lunged toward me, trying to grab my phone, but James stepped forward with 2 FBI agents who'd been seated as guests. Mr. Daniels, you're under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes, Agent Patricia Morrison announced, her badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. The videographer moved in close, capturing every second as they read Robert his Miranda rights. I continued playing recordings, each one more damning than the last. The crowd heard Robert discussing how he'd forged my signature, how he'd transferred our children's trust funds, how he'd been building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent. They heard Sarah laughing about deceiving me, calling me pathetic, describing how she'd plant evidence of alcoholism and mental illness. Mom? Jennifer's voice broke through the chaos. I handed her the USB drive I'd prepared, along with the letter explaining everything. Marcus was already reading his on his phone, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and disgust. David had moved to stand beside me, his hand on my shoulder, protective and supportive without even knowing the full story yet. Sarah tried to crawl away, but 2 more agents blocked her path. Ms. Henderson, you're under arrest for real estate fraud, theft of escrow funds, and conspiracy, they announced. She started screaming that I'd set her up, that everything was edited, that Robert had forced her into it. The woman who'd been my best friend for 20 years threw him under the bus in less than 30 seconds. Father Michael opened the envelope I'd given him, his face paling as he read the contents. He stepped to the microphone and announced, "This ceremony is concluded. I ask everyone to remain seated as law enforcement needs to take statements." Robert's law partners sat in shocked silence as agents presented warrants for the firm's records. Tom, his supposed best friend who'd been covering for him, was already on his phone with his own lawyer. The Wheelers, our neighbors, admitted to investigators that they'd seen Robert at Sarah's condo multiple times, but hadn't wanted to get involved. The videographer captured it all. Robert in handcuffs being led to a federal vehicle. Sarah sobbing and ruining her perfect makeup as she was arrested. Our guests providing witness statements about things they'd seen but ignored. The renewal meant to destroy me had become the crime scene that would destroy them. My children surrounded me, their arms forming a protective circle. "We've got you, Mom," Marcus whispered. "We've got you." The divorce was finalized in record time, 45 days from that Valentine's Day to freedom. Robert's lawyer, not one of his cronies, but a court-appointed attorney since his assets were frozen, advised him to settle quickly rather than face a trial that would add years to his sentence. From his federal holding cell, Robert signed papers giving me everything: the house, the legitimate investments, the cars, even his precious wine collection. His attempts to hide assets had failed spectacularly once the FBI's forensic accountants got involved. They found money in places even I hadn't suspected: cryptocurrency wallets, art pieces purchased under aliases, a boat registered in the Bahamas. Robert was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for wire fraud and tax evasion, though the judge made it clear he'd wanted to give more. The image of him in an orange jumpsuit, his silver hair unkempt and his swagger completely gone, made headlines in the Connecticut Law Journal. His law license was permanently revoked, and the firm he'd spent 20 years building disbanded within 6 months. His former partners distanced themselves so quickly that none even attended his sentencing. Sarah fared worse in many ways. The real estate fraud charges carried a mandatory minimum of 3 years, but the damage to her reputation was irreversible. Every client she'd ever worked with demanded audits of their transactions. 7 families discovered discrepancies, leading to additional charges. Her assets were liquidated to pay restitution, including the condo where she'd entertained my husband and the BMW she'd bought with stolen escrow funds. She fled Connecticut the day she made bail, moving to Oregon where her sister lived, trying to disappear from the shame that followed her like a shadow. The children's reactions evolved over several months. Marcus, ever the analytical one, requested every document, every piece of evidence, needing to understand how he'd missed the signs. He spent a weekend with me going through it all, finally breaking down when he read Robert's email about using the children as pawns. "You didn't deserve this, Mom," he said, holding me as we both cried. "But God, you're the strongest person I know." Jennifer struggled the most initially, her worldview shattered by her father's betrayal. She started therapy immediately, working through her feelings about relationships and trust. 6 months later, she called me laughing. "Mom, I just realized something. Dad and Sarah thought they were destroying you, but they actually set you free. You're happier now than you've been in years." She was right. Without the constant strain of Robert's lies and Sarah's false friendship, I felt lighter, younger, more myself than I had in decades. David, my baby, surprised everyone by becoming my fiercest protector. He changed his last name to my maiden name, Peterson, and when people asked why, he'd simply say, "I want to carry the name of someone I respect." He moved back home for a few months, not because I needed him, but because he needed to be near me, to reassure himself that I was okay. I returned to nursing at 64, not because I needed the money, but because I needed to remember who I was before Robert. The hospital welcomed me back with open arms, and within 6 months I was training new cardiac nurses, sharing decades of wisdom that had been dormant too long. My colleague asked if it was hard, starting over at my age. "Starting over?" I laughed. "I'm not starting over, I'm continuing, from where I left off 20 years ago." James Morrison became more than my legal advisor. He became my friend and eventually, tentatively, something more. We took it slow, both of us carrying scars from Robert's betrayals. Our first real date was 8 months after the failed renewal, dinner at a small Italian place where no one knew our story. "You saved me," I told him over wine. "No," he corrected. "You saved yourself. I just helped you with the paperwork." The house on Willowbrook Lane sold for well over asking price, and I bought a smaller place near the ocean in Madison, Connecticut. 2 bedrooms were plenty, one for me and one for whichever child was visiting. I could walk to the beach every morning, and I did, watching the sunrise and remembering that I'd survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged not just intact, but transformed. The video from the renewal ceremony, the one that was supposed to document my humiliation, went viral for a different reason. Someone had posted it online with the title, "Woman Exposes Cheating Husband and Best Friend at Vow Renewal," and it became a symbol of strength for betrayed spouses everywhere. I received hundreds of letters from women sharing their own stories, thanking me for showing them that fighting back was possible. Standing on my porch now, 18 months after that Valentine's Day, I watched the sunrise paint the Connecticut coastline in shades of gold and pink. The ocean waves carry away the remnants of nightmares that used to wake me at 3 a.m., replacing them with the rhythm of a life rebuilt on truth. My coffee mug, a gift from Jennifer that reads "Warrior Mom," steams in the crisp morning air as I reflect on the journey from victim to victor. Last week I received a letter from Robert in prison. I didn't open it. Instead, I used it to light the fire in my beach house's fireplace, watching his words turn to ash like our marriage had. James says Robert's been trying to contact the children too, spinning new narratives about being seduced by Sarah, about midlife crisis, about mental health struggles that led to poor decisions. But our children see through him now. They've learned to recognize manipulation, to trust their instincts, to value actions over words. Sarah tried to friend me on social media under a fake name last month. The profile picture was different, but I recognized her writing style in the bio. She never could resist using too many adjectives. She's working as a grocery store clerk in Portland, her real estate dreams as dead as our friendship. Part of me wonders if she ever lies awake thinking about those Thursday wine sessions, if she misses having someone who truly cared about her well-being. But mostly, I feel nothing. She's become a stranger who happens to know my secrets, a ghost of a friendship that maybe never really existed. The irony isn't lost on me that their betrayal gave me everything they tried to steal. By attempting to destroy me publicly, they freed me from a marriage that had been slowly suffocating me for years. By trying to take my money, they forced me to become financially literate and independent for the first time in 2 decades. By attempting to turn my children against me, they actually showed my kids what unconditional love looks like when it's tested by the worst circumstances imaginable. I think about the woman who stood at that altar 20 years ago, young and hopeful, believing she needed Robert to be complete. She wasn't wrong to trust, to love, to sacrifice. Those aren't weaknesses unless we give them to people who weaponize them against us. The capacity to love deeply, to trust fully, to give selflessly. These remain strengths. I just learned to be more selective about who deserves them. The betrayal didn't break me, because breaking implies something that can't be rebuilt. Instead, it revealed me. Like a diamond formed under pressure, I discovered that beneath the roles of wife, mother, and friend was a woman of incredible resilience. The saint they mocked, the fool they thought they were deceiving, turned out to be stronger than their cynicism, smarter than their schemes, and braver than their cowardice. Sometimes the people we trust most become our greatest teachers, not through their love, but through their betrayal. They show us that our worth was never dependent on their validation. Robert and Sarah thought they were trading up, but they traded authenticity for deception, genuine love for stolen moments, a real partnership for a house of cards that collapsed the moment truth entered the room. They're now living the lives they deserve, diminished, isolated, and forever marked by their choices. My story isn't unique. Every day someone discovers that their spouse is living a double life, that their best friend has been their worst enemy, that the family they've built is standing on a foundation of lies. If you're reading this and recognizing your own pain in my words, know this. The moment of discovery isn't your ending. It's your beginning. The pain you're feeling isn't weakness leaving your body, it's strength entering it. To those who've been betrayed, document everything, trust your instincts, and remember that their actions reflect their character, not your worth. To those considering betrayal, understand that secrets have a way of revealing themselves, that the person you underestimate might be the one who brings your downfall, and that no stolen happiness can compare to the peace of living with integrity. What would you have done in my position? Would you have walked away quietly, protecting their reputation while sacrificing your truth? Would you have confronted them privately, allowing them to control the narrative? Or would you have fought for your story, ensuring that the truth was told in your voice on your terms? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, if it gave you strength or hope, or even just the knowledge that you're not alone, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, of women who refused to be written out of their own narratives, who chose to become the heroes of their own stories rather than victims in someone else's. Remember, you are stronger than any betrayal, worthy of genuine love, and capable of writing your own ending. The question isn't whether you'll survive the worst day of your life. The question is who you'll choose to become once you do.